Good morning on this Sunday, May 21st, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Protesters of the Atlanta Police Training Facility are not giving up as they swarm City Hall. A new poll of Republican voters in Georgia shows former President Trump is their top pick for president, and business owners in Roswell put the brakes on a plan to shut down one of the city's busiest roads to vehicles. Melita, Theron, and Janelle are here. Brian Robinson is back filling in for Phil. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Hundreds packed Atlanta City Hall to protest the police training facility. They testified for hours in a last-ditch effort to halt its progress.
Some of us might go to jail for this, but some of y'all might go to hell for this.
Both inside and outside Atlanta City Hall, hundreds of protesters shared the same message. They don't want a planned public safety training facility to be built.
Stop Cop City, don't support this funding.
Opponents crowded the council chamber to say no to the Center for First Responders. The council introduced a measure to authorize additional financing for the facility, at least $30 million for its share of the construction. Council member Michael Julian Bond says council members are trying to balance public needs with the needs of first responders.
Our police facilities are dilapidated and are in need of renovation.
The council plans to raise bonds to cover the $30 million investment. Melita, to you first this week. Despite the protests, this project appears to be moving along.
It does, and the final approval will come with a vote on June the 5th, if they keep according to schedule. But I thought some of the protesters made some interesting points. One, they were making the point that they lived here and they were not outside agitators. And another protester reminded some of the council members that they were the ones who had read to her school The Lorax and The Giving Tree, books that encourage environmental thinking by children. So I think a lot of these protests go back to the poor job the council did in rolling this out to begin with, and the lack of community involvement up front in the process for approving this facility, which now seems to be on a track for development and construction.
And Brian, this was the administration, right? This was under Keisha Lance Bottoms when this was approved, is my understanding. So, how does he handle this moving forward? We know he's been very vocal about his plans and how he's going to incorporate this feedback from the community, but it's not stopping the project.
Mayor Dickens has shown he is willing, where needed, to veer away from what the previous administration had done. The fact that he has embraced this, that he has doubled down on this, that tells us a lot of what we need to know about the importance of this facility. We have a violent crime problem in the city of Atlanta. The people who are the victims of that are those same people who are protesting at City Hall. Whenever we have a police killing, what does everybody say? Well, we need more training. That's exactly what this is about, is making sure that the people who are on the streets have the latest up-to-date training to prevent escalation, to not have situations like we had in Minneapolis and in many other cities around the country. We don't need that here. You see City of Atlanta looking forward with a solution, and that's what needs to happen. I commend the mayor for leading on this.
Theron, is there anything that can be done to appease the opponents other than not building it at all?
Well, that's what they want. The opponents who lined up, they were there early, hundreds of them, took up hours of public comment, and as Melita talked about, they made some good points. But I'm very proud of Mayor Dickens. He wrote an op-ed this week that really talked Lori about how there needs to be a balanced approach to dealing with violent crime in the city, also dealing with the root issues of crime. And he also personalized it as a father. He said that he has a phone, and every time that phone buzzes, it's a violent crime or someone being murdered. And he specifically talked about the active shooter, the alleged person who committed the murder. But when he got that call, he depended on those police officers to have the proper training to go and safely arrest this alleged shooter. So the thing that I think is interesting also is that at a time where the city is trying to move forward with technology and also retention, he talked a lot about retaining the officers. I'm hearing from a lot of officers that the morale is good, but more importantly, the firefighters, the first responders, the emergency workers. These are all people, women and men, who are going to receive training. And so the last thing is that this is a $30 million paper that was introduced by Chairman of the Public Safety Committee, Dustin Hillis. This was money that was already approved 2 years ago. So as Melita pointed out, it's going to go to Finance Exec and then and be up for a full council meeting. And just brace yourselves. I mean, these protesters, these women and men, mostly from a confluence of being from here and out of town, are going to continue to protest and make their public comments.
I think we were all glad to see it was peaceful protest, and they spoke for hours and hours in giving out their arguments. But Janelle, to Theron's point, I think we were all struck as we were watching, the events unfold of that Midtown shooting, of how all the law enforcement agencies work together. And it really struck me about how a training facility could really help even make the response even better, faster, and safer.
Yeah, I mean, that's what this is about. This is what I believe everyone was calling on. I mean, we had a whole year of protesting in 2020, and it turned violent, not by, the people that I believe there were a lot of peaceful protesters during the 2020 cycle, but there were a lot of agitators and Antifa and people who just came because they just want to oppose for the sake of opposing. And I think that's what we're dealing with. Let the mayor put a step forward that's going to answer some of the questions and provide a solution to some of the issues that has been talked about for the last few years. We've been talking about police brutality. Now, while I believe that police brutality is a subject that I think has been hijacked and kind of blown out of proportion because I don't see it happening on a mass scale, I feel like they're proving my point. Because when you go up there and you now push back on a training facility and you say that I don't want this, I want something else now, after you told the world that there was so much mass brutality that's happening across the globe, now it's time for you to, now we're asking you, were you even telling the truth? Do you believe that? Because if you do, then you wouldn't fight the solution.
All right, I want to move on. The Atlanta City Council signed off on almost $2 million to purchase about 50 acres in the South River Forest to use for parkland. Theron, back to you. This is a big deal for folks who live in this area.
Yeah, shout out to Southeast Atlanta, particularly the southern part of Atlanta. And now, at a time where Atlanta prides itself on our, diversity, our civil rights, being a good place to do business. I'm going to jab at Brian here a little later on to talk about this Biden economy, 7 months of straight job growth in this country. But we also talk about our trees and our parks. And so for the city of Atlanta to step up and get the approval to purchase this land for parks is just a huge win for the city. And I think the residents are going to be very, very happy about the parks.
All right, one more topic here in Atlanta. It's the return of Music Midtown. The popular music festival was canceled last year. Organizers said there were circumstances beyond their control, but Billboard reported it was due to Georgia's gun laws, which allow guns on government land, Melita, and parks and all that. Melita, your thoughts on this, and how are they getting around it this year?
Well, I think we're yet to hear how they're going to get around that, because the laws that were cited in 2022 have not changed. Perhaps they've worked a new deal with their insurance company for liability. Maybe they've got new plans for security. But I know there are a lot of people who are very happy to see this music festival return. It's a very popular event for the city, and some pretty good bands on the lineup.
Brian?
First, let me just say, as a Generation Xer, that I am thrilled that Guns N' Roses is coming to Music Midtown. This is the first time in 20 years they've had something on the agenda that I'm like, yeah, that. I will be at that.
You're not
right?
looking forward to Lil Baby?
Well, we'll see if my Uber hasn't arrived yet. Maybe I'll stay around for that. But anyway, I was celebrating it until I saw in the AJC story that Guns N' Roses was there to attract, quote, an older crowd. So, yeah, forget it, Rodney Ho. That's ridiculous. But here's why it's different about the 2022 as far as our gun law. Melita's right. Our gun law hasn't changed. You know what has changed? It's no longer an election year with Stacey Abrams on the ballot. And all of a sudden, those concerns have melted away. Isn't that coincidental?
Theron, is that coincidental? By the way, I saw Coldplay, so I was a little hip back then. So for the older crowd.
Well, I also just learned this week, and my wife is excited to see Pink,
Yes.
who's going to be there as well. But I'm a Lil Baby fan. Shout out to Lil Baby. I'm throwing up the floor for his group. Big Lil Baby fan. I'm looking forward to his tour.
So we'll all be there? Is that what we're saying?
I think we're going to be there. And look, I'll give you some lyrics and some stuff for Lil Baby. Help me out with Guns N' Roses. I didn't really listen to them a lot.
Oh, God, you missed out.
Yeah, but I did grow up in Athens, so REM. Shout out to REM. But no, look. The thing about this is that the Music Midtown is coming back. I think that we want a very good show, but we also want safety. And I think that the organizers have got to make sure that they are ready for this law, that people are going to probably bring their guns into this concert. And so what we don't want to happen is, while people are trying to safely enjoy a concert, and there will be drinks and alcohol involved, that we don't have people who tempers flare and they then choose to use their guns to shoot each other. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it is a reality based on this current law And I think that the concert organizers are going to have to make sure that they take that in account as they want to have a safe but productive show.
Janelle.
I think I said it back then. I don't think this was ever about, the gun law. I thought it was always about money. I mean, when you're a business owner, you make decisions based on the money. So there was something that was interfering with the money, which is why they're coming back this year, and they're coming to the same state, and they're bringing Guns N' Roses. So, I mean, I think this is all about business and making a business move. I'm glad they're back. It's going to be fun.
Well, it always sells out, so get your tickets quickly. All right, up next, a new poll among Republican voters in Georgia shows their pick for president is Donald Trump. We'll discuss after the break.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
In a landmark communications poll released Wednesday, former President Donald Trump comes out on top when it comes to likely Republican voters. He's at 40%. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's expected to officially announce his candidacy for president this week, follows at 32%. Governor Brian Kemp polls at 7% here in Georgia. In this presidential poll, he, of course, has not announced that he would make a run in 2024. Brian, to you first. What do you make of these numbers?
Georgia Republicans are different than the rest of the country's Republicans. That's what it tells me. You look elsewhere, Trump is over 50%. And in fact, we have seen polling from UGA that had Trump over 50% in the last month. So it's probably somewhere in between. This is why I wish, and my wish was not granted, that Georgia's primary was amongst the first in the nation, because I think our Republican electorate has proven they're willing to think independently and render a verdict on who can win. I mean, they did it last year, right? Trump wanted his slate of candidates, the other slate won, and then won the general election. Georgia Republicans know what it takes to win in Georgia. And guess what? Whoever is in the White House on January the 20th, 2025, the day that Georgia wins its 4th national championship, will have to win in Georgia. They have to. Let us decide who the nominee should be.
Melita, you were smirking over there, not just because of his national championship. He always has to get that in somehow.
Well, there was another poll that came out on Friday morning that had different results. And then also the late breaking news as we were about to tape the show, Fani Willis is saying that when the judges are at a conference and she's allowing all of her DAs to work remotely, and so there's a week in early August that indictments might come down. So really, all of these polls at this point need to be taken with a huge shaker of salt.
Janelle?
Well, it's interesting because on the way here to film, I heard that Senator Tim Scott, is supposed to be jumping in on tomorrow, and that Governor DeSantis will be coming in this coming week as well. So it's interesting to see how that's going to shake things up. But I stand with Brian. I agree with him 100%. I think Georgia sent a clear message during the midterms. I think that we need to pay attention to that. The fact that it seems a little split between DeSantis and Trump is what the conversations are in the state of Georgia. And I mean, right now, Kelvin and I are undecided on who we're going to support. So that shows where we are as Republicans.
Darren?
The poll didn't really shock me that Donald Trump is at the top. Mm-hmm. What really sort of shocked me is, like, where's Nikki Haley? Where's Mike Pence? And I was just sharing during the break.
Hovering in the single digits.
Yeah, hovering in the single digits. And so that's the first thing. So can Mike Pence, he just hired Bobby Cipero, who was the campaign manager for Brian Kemp, who now is going to be leading a super PAC. But, let me also just pour a little water on this sort of flame that Janelle and Brian are trying to put out here, is that the current governor of Georgia did a masterful job of trying to convince Georgia Republicans that they need to move on from Donald Trump. He never said his name, I want to be clear. And so for now, a poll to come out and say, no, we want him as our nominee, the Republican Party, I'm very interested to see what the governor is going to do and others to try to say, hey, how do we stop Donald Trump? Because I think there's a fraction of Republicans here that do not want them as his nominee.
All right, I got to move on because state lawmakers are still digesting the 30 pages of budget vetoes Governor Kemp put out, putting about $200 million in spending on hold. According to the AJC, lawmakers passed a budget that included $26 million for retiree raises, $6.3 million for free meals for students, and $6 million for bonuses for school custodians. Theron, these cuts really took a lot of people off guard.
So it was, because I think this, and correct me if I'm wrong, B-Rob, but this is the first time that a governor in a long time has sort of vetoed a line item on a budget. So that was the first thing for us, people who are all kind of paying attention to the budget in May, because that's really what you're waiting for the governor to sign. But also, Lori, I mean, these are some pretty tough cuts. These are, disappointing for with children, different things that a lot of us are dependent on. And while it's only, I think, less than, 10% of the budget that was vetoed, it's still a significant amount. I think $200 million out of a $2 billion budget item. And so the governor has explained why he made these cuts. Also, lastly, I think the governor and Kelly Farr is looking down the road. They're looking at Georgia's economy. Is it bright days ahead, or are there some stormy days ahead?
Well, also on the chopping block, $4 million to boost the pay of psychiatric hospital workers. Now, this week, in an I-Team investigation, Fox 5's Randy Travis reported the average wait time for inmates in Georgia to get a mental competency evaluation is 10 months. Now, DBHDD Commissioner Kevin Tanner says it's hard to retain and recruit employees because pay hasn't kept up with the private sector, and that hasn't happened for decades. Melita.
Well, this is a huge, huge problem. And when you have sheriffs calling for the funding for these evaluations and getting people out of prisons, the sheriff said the state of Georgia needs to do a better job than we're doing right here. The system needs to change. A jail is not a place for these people. So the state is opening itself up to all kinds of constitutional challenges on behalf of these mentally ill people who are not receiving treatment and who are being kept in solitary confinement.
Brian, I do communications work for DBHDD. I want to put that out there. There's a lot of good work on the horizon, but it needs funding. Were you surprised at these particular cuts?
I was, because there has been an emphasis on these services in the General Assembly and in the governor's office. When we talk about gun issues, mental health is what we pivot to as far as we have to address this. We passed important legislation in 2021, didn't get the follow-up over the line in 2022, but we need to do it, in 2023, but need to do it in 2024. So this is one of the major milestone issues that we will face over this next decade. And I think that given these vetoes, the onus is on Governor Kemp to put forward a vision of what he wants to see and how we're going to address these issues.
Janelle.
Yeah, I was thinking about when he first came into office. You remember he did like the 4% cut. He has every department to do like a 4% cut, and that ended up turning out to be a good thing because we ran into COVID and we had the pandemic, and so that was a good move. So my question now is, if you're doing these cuts because you're preparing for a rainy day, but we're also sending out money or sending out checks because we had a surplus, I'm not seeing the correlation there. I was kind of concerned about the funds that was taken from the charter schools. I was really concerned about that, especially when our kids are so far behind. So I'm really watching this. I want to understand what's going on and why we're doing this.
Melita.
The exact number was $236 million. That's $1 million per legislator in the General Assembly. That's a very interesting signal that the governor is sending. I'm in charge.
Interesting. All right. Coming up, business owners in Roswell outraged about a plan to close a busy downtown street to vehicles. We'll discuss next.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Plenty of business owners in Roswell are upset about a plan to shut down one of the city's busiest streets to vehicles. Roswell Mayor Kurt Wilson wants to close off a section of Canton Street to vehicles on summer weekends, making it pedestrian friendly. Business owners fear this will lead to even more parking problems and drive away business. Melita, a plan like this would need council approval as well.
It does. And he deliberately left 2 members of his council off the email threads about these plans. And the council wants a more transparent process. Some of the members of the council want to pause this until a parking lot is completed, till some paths from parking lots to these streets are completed, and to give the businesses an opportunity to adapt to this idea, because it didn't have any transparency or public opinion.
Janelle.
Yeah, I mean, so this whole Canton Street location is one of my favorite places in Georgia. I mean, it's our date place, so we go there often. And I will say this, I don't know the intentions of Mayor Wilson, but I will say this, I stand with the businesses. And the reason why is because when we have the Uber, when we Uber because there is a lack of parking, it helps that we can drive up to the restaurants and get out, and then versus coming to like a stop and having to walk. And I don't think that's a good move. I stand with the businesses. I'm always going to stand with our businesses.
All right, the Fulton County Board of Commissioners voted Wednesday to approve the selection of lawyer Patrice Perkins Hooker to serve as chair of the Fulton County Registration and Elections Board. Her nomination, announced at the start of Wednesday's commission meeting, came as quite a surprise to many, since Commission Chairman Rob Pitts had last week nominated former Commissioner Lee Morris, a Republican, to fill the seat. Brian?
Lee Morris has been a great county commissioner, and he's not somebody who's a raging partisan. And the fact that he was nominated by Chairman Rob Pitts, a well-known Democrat, a partisan Democrat, shows that he would have been a fair administrator of the election board, which, by the way, is a job nobody really wants, right? Who wants to head up Fulton County elections? I mean, all you're going to do is get beaten in the head no matter what happens. The fact that someone was willing to step forward, they should have had rose petals thrown in front of their feet, right? So I disagree with the decision to back off, because the backstory here, Lori, is that there's folks on the state level that want to take over Fulton County, and Chairman Pitts wants to prevent that from happening and maintain local control. So he was looking for a bridge builder there. Strategically, what Pitts was doing made a lot of sense.
Theron?
Chairman Pitts is a dear friend of mine. He gives me a hall pass often to hang out with him in Buckhead, because if you go in Buckhead, you're going to see Chairman Pitts. And I agree. Look, Lee Morris served the county commission in an honorable way, but he lost his election because the district has changed and the new commissioner is doing a fantastic job. I'm proud that Lee Morris and Rob Pitts, because of very seasoned politicians, and say, hey, look, let's not go into this commission meeting, because you saw a massive amount of Democrats pushing back on this. Marvin Arrington Jr. and others on the commission led a charge to stop this. And so I think it was a right decision for Lee Morris to say, hey, take me out. And then Patrice Perkins Hooker is a wonderful lawyer, wonderful woman who has done a lot of good work in this county. So I think ultimately the chairman was trying to maybe mend some fences. Wrong time, wrong person, but I think Patrice is a good option.
All right, I want to go back to these staffing shortages, because they're also leading cuts to the popular Hero units that help stranded motorists. They will no longer be available overnight, and they'll only be patrolling about 250 miles of highway in Metro Atlanta, down from almost 400. Melita, I mean, this is heartbreaking, because if you've ever been stranded and the panic sets in, especially on top end 285, which they still will patrol, but just not overnight, this is a sign of the times.
There are massive reductions in the amount of territory that they'll patrol, and the hours that they'll be available. So this is a real blow to people who travel alone and people who really always like to have those Hero units as a backup plan.
Janelle?
Yeah, I mean, I had a personal story. I mean, when I first moved to Georgia, I had a flat tire and I didn't even know Hero existed. I called the police. They told me to call Hero, and they came out, and I remember I was trying to tip them, and they were like, no, we can't take any money. And so I was kind of saddened to hear this, because I was a single woman. I was, in the car by myself, and it felt safer just having that support, even though I do know how to change my own tire. So,
Brian, this one's going to hurt.
It is, but you don't want to be changing the tire on the side of I-85 by yourself. It's very dangerous. You need somebody who can put the cones out, clear some space. It's a public safety issue, but it's also a economic efficiency issue. These Hero trucks get wrecked cars out of the middle lanes and stop the blocking of traffic, which creates these bottlenecks and these nightmares, which have come back in full force here in Metro Atlanta in the last 2 months. It has been a tremendous change. It's a big loss. Sign of the times, Lori? That's the word you use? Absolutely. This is why restaurants don't stay open as late. This is why nursing homes have closed down wings. You can't get workers.
Darren, real quickly, got to wrap.
When I saw the article, I had the same reaction you all had. But also, I got to believe that Commissioner McMurray is looking at this, because I also saw the word temporary. This is a temporary reduction of hours. However, you're right. The men and women that are out there late into the nights, basically making us safe. We need to find more money. If it's a staffing issue, it's a budget issue, let's find the money. Let's get them jobs.
I hope they do. All right, winners and losers, straight ahead.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Okay, Brian, since you're our guest.
Well, since I'm filling in for Phil Kent, let me make my winners the Legislators of the Year picked by James Magazine, his publication. Matt Hatchett, the House Appropriations Committee Chairman, Senator Matt Brass, the Rules Committee Chairman, and Democrat leader James Beverly. So congratulations to them. My loser is the relationship, which has been really strong, between the General Assembly Republicans and Governor Kemp's office. These budget vetoes have caused some real strain there, and I think that could spill over into the 2024 session.
We'll be watching. Melita.
Well, I want to make a winner the Zoo Atlanta team that delivered Willie B3, the new baby gorilla. And also, I want to make a winner of Patrice Perkins Hooker. She served on the Georgia Windlass Board many years ago. She was the first black president of the Georgia Bar Association. And she is just a stellar individual. And this means once Kathy Willard steps down, all 4 major metro Atlanta counties will have a black woman as chair of their elections board.
Yeah. Theron.
My first winner is going to be Myrna White, who retired last week from the Atlanta airport, 32 years of service. So congratulations, Myrna. My second winner is going to be Bluebird, who the manufacturing company down in Fort Valley, Georgia, was voted in to join the United Steelworkers. And then lastly, I want to make President Biden a winner. We're talking about 7 straight months of job growth. Also, we're celebrating Infrastructure Week in the state of Georgia. A lot of money, billions and billions of dollars that are coming to Georgia for transportation infrastructure and clean energy.
Janelle?
I would like to make the Towns County Republican Party my winner. We had a great event last night, and I really enjoyed them. So I really want to make them give a shout out to Betsy Young, who is leading them. And lastly, speaking of legislation and what was happening in this past session, school choice, I have a podcast and a radio show coming up where I'm interviewing Amanda McGee, who is in support of school choice, and Representative Darlene Taylor, who voted against it.
All right, and you're going back to your alma mater, Clark Atlanta, to give those speech to the young folks.
Yeah, Clark Central.
Clark Central, sorry.
Yeah, I'm on my way, y'all.
All right. See you next week.